If the foregoing pages have painted a dark picture of incessant strife and unceasing warfare, it is necessary to emphasize that for a large number of people, both Hindus and Muslims, the normal workaday life was one of indifference, though hardly of amity and harmony. In several fields of human endeavor and the daily grind, people lived in peace. Certain bridges were made which served, albeit briefly and superficially, to bring the communities closer, to accentuate the common bonds, to magnify the links, to play down the diversities, and to create a spark of common sympathy. Sometimes these attempts bore fruit, sometimes they failed to compose the indifferences. The fact that such attempts were made is as significant as the fact that they ultimately failed. Nothing illustrates the genuineness of these attempts so much as the fact that they were made even in a sphere where divergence was at the maximum, namely religion. In the 15th century, Kabir stands out as the paramount expositor of a rapprochement between Hinduism and Islam. Abandoned by her mother, a Brahmin widow of Benares, he was adopted and brought up by a poor Muslim weaver family. Goaded by an innate curiosity, bred with a mind torn by doubt and uncertainty, he wanted to ask questions, to seek the answers and to pursue the truth. Knowing that he was the son of a Hindu of the highest caste, living and imbibing the influences of a Muslim household, breathing in the air of the holy city of Benares, listening to religious and intellectual discussions, his natural intelligence awakened in him a desire to know more about the two religions. He listened and thought and observed the ideas of his friends, teachers, and neighbors. What appealed to him, particularly under the inspiration of Ramananda, was the inherent significance of the spiritual side of religion. Spiritual attainments took precedence over being a Hindu or a Muslim. A study of Sufism strengthened this conviction. Forms and rituals were the husk of religion, spirituality its heart and core. In both Hinduism and Islam, he attacked the meaningless pursuit of external requirements and textbook formalities. But there was one difference. In Hinduism, he criticized even the fundamentals: caste system, untouchability, taboos in food, idol worship, incarnation, polytheism, even metempsychosis. In Islam, he was content to assault ritual and custom alone, never questioning its basic teachings. On the whole, his ideas, his concepts, the contours of his thought, the turn of his phrase, the very edge of his argument are Islamic, not Hindu. Formally, he did not forsake Hinduism, but in all but name he became a Muslim and a Sufi. Yet his attitude to Hinduism differed from that of the Muslims. It was neither self-righteous nor superior. Both religions had weaknesses, and it was futile to compare them in order to prove the primacy of either. All religious quest was virtuous. He made this not only the bedrock of his belief, but also the starting point of his mission of creating and spreading Hindu-Muslim unity. If the followers of the two creeds were once united on the spiritual plane, social, cultural, perhaps even political unity would come of its own volition. However, Kabir's teachings received by those for whose ultimate unity they were fashioned, they first startled and then enraged everyone. So great was the popular resentment that the case went to the emperor himself. The Orthodox Sultan Sikandar Lodi, it is perhaps an indication of Kabir's acceptance by the Muslims as a Muslim that the royal eye saw nothing improper in his teachings, and the controversy was dismissed by the suggestion that Kabir should betake himself to some distant and obscure place where his message would not disturb the peace of the realm. By the time he died, a loyal body of disciples had gathered around him who propagated his word and did not let his name or effort die. It is significant that the complainants against him came from both religions. Hindus and Muslims equally believed that their religion was being subverted, that Kabir, in following an ignis fatuus, was uprooting their beliefs, their traditions, and their faith. To this day, his following remains divided into a Hindu group and a Muslim group. each tenaciously holding that he belonged to its religion. Kabir's place in the religious history of India remains high, because through him was articulated most forcefully and with great effect the belief that Hinduism and Islam could unite in a fervent belief in God, and that the division on the basis of community, ritual, or theology was not important. The torch, lit by Kabir, ignited in course of time a wildfire which carried upon the emotions of sincere seekers of spiritual ecstasy, spread to all corners of the subcontinent. Kabir had not spoken in vain, and the names of the saints and thinkers who followed in his footsteps make a distinguished roll. Sadhu, Chaitanya, Namdeva, Tukaram, Nanak. Why did the Muslims refuse to tread the path lighted by such intellects? To them, the important question was whether the voice that beckoned them was the voice of Islam or the voice of Hinduism. Their answer was that though it sounded like the call of Islam, it was a subtle Hindu move to subvert Islam, to absorb the alien element into the Indian milieu, and thus to turn the Muslim triumph in India into a defeat. They knew that in the past Hinduism had by this method consumed many sects which had arisen within its fold. By preaching the acceptance of a few Islamic values, Hinduism, far from compromising with Islam, was actually manifesting its remarkable capacity for synthesis. Further, any success of such ideas would have led to a decrease in the number of professing Muslims in India. This could not have been a pleasing prospect to a community which was ever conscious of its minority status. Moreover, the emphasis on the spirituality of religion, coupled with a constant reminder of the emptiness and wickedness of ritual, gradually led to laxity to the practice of religion. This neglect was unwelcome both to the orthodox and to the commonalty. Formal observance is dear to every religion. It helps solidarity and distinguishes the we from the they. Laxity could perhaps one day would lead to irreligiousness, and Islam would vanish from the face of India. Had Islam conquered India so that one day it would compromise with the heathen and lose itself in the vast and infidel world of Hinduism? When the common Muslim argued in this manner, no virtues of bhakti could attract him. Still another factor worked against the new movement. Its central belief struck at the root of Muslim self-respect. If religion was nothing but spirituality, if Hinduism and Islam were the same, if all religions were the same, what happened to the Muslim's pride in Islam? In the loyalty of the Indian Muslim to his religion, neither color nor race played any part. He was a Muslim because he believed in Islam. Religion was his individuality, his distinguishing mark, his singularity. When this was taken away from him, he fortified all he had. Therefore, he regarded such movements not as an attempt at social unity or even as an intellectual quest for conciliation, but as a conspiracy to undermine his religion. For him it was a religious problem, a crisis of belief. The choice lay clear between Islam and compromise. Unhesitatingly he chose Islam. Whatever the cause, the Indian Muslim was not prepared to lose his individuality. The movement for Hindu-Muslim unity thus came to nothing, but it left its marks on several minor things, both social and religious. During periods of communal peace and political calm, toleration showed its welcome face. Hindus of some areas were regular visitors of Muslim shrines and other centers of pilgrimage. Some Muslim saints like Khwaja Hasan Nizami of Delhi counted Hindus among their disciples. Hindu women prayed at the tombs of Muslim saints and believed that their wishes would come true. Hindus and Muslims were present at each other's religious festivities. Muslims were to be seen in the Dussehra processions. At Holi, they threw colored water on their Hindu friends. Hindus reciprocated by visiting their Muslim friends at Eid and even participating in the Muharram festival. These might have been minor things, mere drops of goodwill in the wide waters of antipathy and misunderstanding, and they did not avert a final breakup, but they did exist, and it is our duty to record them. In culture too, there were strands of unity. Above all, the Urdu language could have, and in some measure did, become a cementing force. It was the spoken tongue of millions of Hindus and Muslims in the Punjab, Delhi, the United Provinces, the Central Provinces and Bihar. Several Hindu names appear in the annals of its literature, from Ratan Nath Sarshar to Firak Gorakhpuri. Hindu prose writers and essayists contributed to Urdu journals. Hindu poets recited their verses in mushairas. A few of them have been men of distinction in modern poetry. There were well-known Hindu patrons of Urdu literature like Sir Tej Bahadur Sapru. The first comprehensive history of Urdu literature in English was written by Hindu Saxena. This Hindu-Muslim culture bloomed in the United Provinces, where diverse cultural traits met and merged to produce a way of life which is neither exclusively Hindu or exclusively Muslim. In Lucknow and other cities, one saw this intermixture in its glory. It extended to many walks of life: dress, language, literature, folklore, good living, even parts of food. Friendships crossed communal boundaries. One language united those who spoke it. Literary gatherings took no notice of religious beliefs. In normal times, there were definite signs of the evolution of a common culture. But this attempt failed to hold its ground owing to some serious weaknesses in its character. First, it was an urban phenomenon confined to places like Aligarh, Allahabad, Lucknow and some smaller towns. It did not touch the hamlets, where lack of education continued to breed ill feeling. Urbanization always unites the city dwellers in some sort of veiled opposition to the outsiders. There was an element of culture in it, but it was predominantly a question of the urbanites versus the country folk, not of a conscious effort to evolve a Hindu-Muslim culture. Secondly, even in the cities it was confined to the upper classes. The well-to-do dressed alike had common culinary tastes, entertained each other, read the same books, lived in similar houses, belonged to the same clubs. They were the upper classes and were aware of it. Less than a century ago, they had been united in their allegiance to the code of oath. Temperamentally and by upbringing, they were courtiers, conscious of their superiority, of their wealth, and as time passed, of their insecurity. As popular rule approached nearer, they closed ranks, and like all men in fear of an ill wind, magnified the community of interest. It was a closed society whose standards and values did not touch the masses. The important point is that even this superficial common culture failed to spread. It stayed within the confines of Delhi, Lucknow, and Hyderabad. This was due partly to historical reasons, partly to economic reasons, and partly to geographical reasons. Another weakness was its highly formal character. It put too much emphasis on the external observance of politeness, manners, and other graces of good society. The ridiculous lengths to which such formalities practiced for their own sake could be taken has become a part of the lore of the UP Wala. This rigidity of formal behavior, this primness, often coupled with contemptuous references to those outside the pale of this code of conduct, hindered the spread of this culture to the other regions. In the end, its mannerism became an object of kindly ridicule. Basically, the UP culture was Muslim in character and content. It was an example of the Hindu upper classes accepting the remnants of the Mughal way of life, not of the Muslims making a compromise with the Hindu environment. Such one-sided borrowing could not make it a genuine movement towards unity. It lacked the solid foundations of a common outlook on life, a common mode of thinking, the awareness of a common past and a common future in accord on the values of life. That is why it failed to withstand the assault of communal politics. When the times were normal and political controversy was languid, there was a show of amity and good fellowship, part genuine, part made up, and all was well. When prospects of self-rule appeared on the horizon, when one of the parties took over the reins of government, when jobs were to be dispensed, or when a single communal riot broke out, the entire world of civility came tumbling down in dust and smoke. Sometimes knowledge increases, not so much by giving answers as by asking questions. In this chapter, we will ask 4 leading questions. Was Pakistan inevitable? Could an alternative scheme be substituted for Pakistan? Why did the Muslims of the Hindu provinces support the Pakistan demand? How can the leaving behind of millions of Muslims in the Indian Union be reconciled with the theory that all Indian Muslims constituted one nation and wanted one homeland for that nation? Some of these questions are hypothetical, others do not lend themselves to a definite answer. No attempt will be made here to simplify matters, for sometimes to simplify is not clarify. What follows is merely thinking aloud on certain aspects of the Muslim problem in imperial India, the two-nation theory and the creation of Pakistan. Was Pakistan inevitable? The point at issue was whether a divided India with all its flaws was better or worse than an Indian chaos. Was the unity of India a creation of the British which was destined to disappear with them? It may be that it was the British determination to introduce a parliamentary form of government in India that led to a demand for partition. It may also be argued that an early implementation of a federal part of the 1935 constitution would have created a situation where the idea of separation might not have germinated in the Muslim mind. It is possible that there is a direct and causal connection between separate electorate and the creation of Pakistan. It is also possible that the unity of India was a British gift which India was fated to enjoy only so long as the donor was present on the spot. Perhaps a more rational approach to this question would be to view it against the background of the development of self-government in India. The seeds of Hindu-Muslim discord were sown during the partition of Bengal and the making of the 1909 reforms. The former divided the Hindus from the Muslims. The latter was the first major installment of a series of measures eventually leading to independence. In other words, the incipience of self-government was coterminous with the appearance of Hindu-Muslim schism. The larger the dose of self-government to India, the deeper the Muslim fear of Hindu rule. Hindu opposition to the grant of separate representation aggravated the situation and made the Muslims look at each advance towards self-rule as one more step towards their thraldom. This process continued until the working of provincial autonomy 1937 to 1939 told them that the consummation of Indian independence would not bring freedom. It was only that they began to think of a separate state of their own, where independence would be meaningful and freedom a reality. Perhaps the expedient of communal electorates was neither enough nor effective. Had more drastic safeguards against the communal tension been devised and incorporated in the 1935 constitution, Muslims might have shown less fear of democracy and greater willingness to enter a federal union. Was Congress responsible for the emergence of Muslim nationalism and the creation of Pakistan? We have already touched upon this question, but there seems to be a near unanimous opinion among the knowledgeable that Congress' attitude towards the Muslim problem was a major contributory factor. Professor Copeland, Lord Eustace Percy, Sir Stanley Reed, Sir Ivor Jennings, Sir Francis Tucker, Mr. Ian Stephens, Professor Rushbrook Williams, Mr. Penderell Moon and other competent judges of Indian affairs agree that the Congress' arrogance and the way in which it worked, the provincial governments destroyed all the assumptions on which Muslim acceptance of the federation had been grounded, and so intensified separatism. Sir Ivor Jennings thinks that even as late as 1945, a united India in the shape of a loose federation of Hindu and Muslim states would have been possible. If the Hindus had realized that the Muslim demand for a separate Muslim state with Islamic ideals needed to be met, the Congress' refusal to see this made the creation of Pakistan inevitable. His latest view is that agreement could have been reached in 1940 or 1942 if the Congress had been willing to concede more to the Muslims alternatives to Pakistan. When the Muslim mind was evolving the theory of two nations and preparing the demand for a separate state, many alternative schemes were formulated. Abdul Latif of Hyderabad, a Punjabi Sir Sikandar Hayat Khan, Sir Feroz Khan Noon and others suggested that their own plans. From the British side too came some suggestions to solve the Indian problem without the ultimate recourse of partition. Professor Courtman was in favour of the redrawing provincial boundaries and forming a federation of autonomous provinces. Clement Device, the liberal leader, thought of something on the lines of the United States, with sovereign provinces transferring to the centre such rights as they deemed satisfactory, with full right to contract out subject to some sort of plebiscite. Coney Zillikus suggested a multinational Indian membership of the United Nations, under which Muslims would be a separate United Nations member and under its protection. Sir Arthur Page's rather impracticable solution was to divide India into predominantly Hindu and Muslim districts and to give them dominion status. Finally, there was Professor Coupland's regionalism. Among the official alternatives were those of Cripps, contained in his draft declaration of March 1942 and on the cabinet mission. It is a fact of great importance that all these schemes came from the Muslim or British side. The Hindus kept silent. Not one of their leaders gave serious thought to an alternative to partition. They showed remarkable ingenuity in arguing against Pakistan, in pointing out its disadvantages, and in predicting a calamitous future of this artificially created state. Rajendra praised Rajendra Prasad wrote a long book on India divided but suggested no alternative to it. This is where the weakness of the Congress approach showed its most damaging aspect, because the Muslim problem did not exist. Therefore, it offered no obstacle to Indian independence. Because Muslim nationalism was a myth, therefore it merited no attention. The Muslim League was an unrepresentative body which spoke for the minority of a minority. Therefore, its demand could safely be ignored. This was the cardinal mistake for which the Congress had to pay the heavy price of partition. Its political short-sightedness was Jinnah's triumph. Why did the Congress not make an effort to reach some sort of an agreement with the Muslims on the issue of Pakistan? One explanation is that it was convinced that if it stood firm, the pressure of events and the logic of history would force the Muslims to come into a united unitary India. Another reason was that it never appreciated the strength of Muslim nationalism and dismissed it with such irrelevancies as that the Muslims were converts from Hinduism, or that religious nationalism was a relic of primitive barbarism, or that the Muslims themselves did not realize what they were asking for, and so on. These arguments might have been enough to solve the Congress conscience, but they gave no clue to the political conundrum. Muslims of Hindu provinces and Pakistan. It was an interesting feature of Muslim politics in India that the demand for Pakistan received great support in the Hindu majority provinces than in the Muslim majority provinces. The Punjab was predominantly unionist till the end of 1945. Sindh did not take kindly to the Muslim League till 1946, and the frontier province maintained its red shirts in power right till the Independence Day. In Bengal alone was the Pakistan credo popular, but even there the League following was less resolute and numerous than it could have been. But the Muslims of the Hindu provinces were completely loyal to Jinnah and fully supported the Pakistan idea. What explains this phenomenon? One reason springs to mind at once. The Muslims of the Muslim majority areas felt secure in their provinces. Though they did not live under a Muslim League government, the regime did not matter much as long as they were in a majority. They had no fear of a Hindu Raj. On the other hand, Muslims of the Hindu areas lived in terror, not only of the present but also of the future. They were living or would live under a Hindu government in which they had no confidence. This was not conducive to a feeling of security. The 2 years of Congress rule had been a nightmare for them, and they would have given their right hand to stop a repeat performance. They would never be a majority and would therefore never rule over themselves. They were in this morass of hopelessness when Jinnah presented them with the idea of a separate state where the spectre of a Hindu Raj would never materialize. The plan captured their imagination, and from that moment they were Jinnah's men. So far the argument is clear and strong, but, and there is the rub, these Muslims were not going to be a part of Pakistan. It is true that Jinnah used the word homeland for the Pakistan he was demanding, but this was loose thinking. If by homeland he meant a country which would accommodate all the Indian Muslims, he should have made it clear that it implied a transfer of population, but he definitely rejected this idea. He neither favored nor anticipated a wholesale migration of Muslims to the projected Pakistan. On the contrary, he asked them to stay in India and to be loyal to the government. He wanted them to stay back and not to come to Pakistan. Apparently, the word homeland was not used in the normal sense of a country to which all the people demanding it are expected or asked to come. So, it is evident that Muslims of the Hindu areas voted for Pakistan in full knowledge that they would have to remain in India. They fought for a cause which was, strictly speaking, not their cause at all. They strove for the creation of a country which was not going to be their country and in which they were never going to live. Why then did they vote for Pakistan? One explanation is that their struggle in behalf of Pakistan was a sort of vicarious suffering. They wanted Pakistan because at least a major portion of the nation could live in freedom. In psychological terms, it was a compensation for them to see that they would be free. They here meaning their nation, not they themselves. This bore the appearance of sacrifice. They were incurring the hostility of their Hindu neighbors and future masters by agitating for Pakistan. But in fact, it was not so. The concept of political retaliation played its part in the situation. It was then widely understood that the presence of a large Hindu minority in Pakistan would assure the protection of a Muslim minority in Hindu India. On one or two occasions, Jinnah actually referred to this idea and told the Muslims of Hindu areas that if his government in Pakistan treated justly with its Hindus, there was no reason for the Indian government not extending full protection to its Muslim minority. Another explanation is that the emotional wave of propaganda for Pakistan was then at such a pitch that the Muslims of Hindu India gave no thought to their own future. The two-nation theory had enthralled them so completely that it never occurred to them that the creation of Pakistan on its basis would create a problem for them or adversely affect their future. Critical faculties were benumbed in the hurly-burly of events and by the sweep of the nationalist movement. They never considered themselves to be in a position different from that of their co-religionists of the Muslim provinces. This difference was brought home to them only when large-scale riots started towards the end of 1946. By then it was too late. They had then gone too far in their support to Pakistan to withdraw from it and were too deeply committed to change their views. It is possible that had they known what was in store for them, their enthusiasm for the Pakistan plan might not have been so uncritical. It is not impossible that Muslims of the Hindu areas neither wanted Pakistan nor believed that it was possible of realization. They supported the idea in the belief, or at least in the attempt, that their pro-Muslim League policy would help create a political deadlock and thus postpone a final settlement leading to a British withdrawal. It was in their interest to prolong the rule of the impartial British and to put off as long as possible the rule of the partial Hindu. Pakistan might or might not come, but their interest lay in giving their loyalty to Jinnah and thereby protect their stakes. The practical side of the two-nation theory. We have already seen that for multifarious reasons, the Muslims of India had come to look upon themselves as one nation. They demanded the creation of a separate state for this nation. But if all Indian Muslims constituted one nation, and if the nation state of Pakistan was brought into being for them, how do we explain the fact that about 40 million members of this nation were left behind and did not become a part of Pakistan? Either Pakistan was meant or it was not meant to be a homeland for the Muslims of India. If it was, then these millions should have come to Pakistan so that the whole nation was accommodated in the new state of their dreams. If it was not, then there was no point in claiming that all the Muslims in India were one nation and wanted Pakistan. As matters turned out to be, it seems that the inclusion of all Indian Muslims in Pakistan was not contemplated. If that is correct, then the Muslim League did not want a homeland, but only independence for certain areas, for certain Muslim areas. In theory, therefore, the conception of the two nations had a serious flaw. Perhaps we can deal with this quandary by looking at the practical side of Jinnah's politics. He felt that a united India under a democratic government would inevitably mean a Muslim minority living forever under a Hindu majority. How could he avoid this? Safeguards were not enough, and anyway, after the British were gone, who would guarantee them? The only solution he could think of was that Muslim majority provinces should make a separate state where Muslims would not have to live under a perpetual Hindu government. He therefore formulated the Pakistan demand. Then the question arose, how to justify this demand? On what basis should it be made? Modern history supplied the answer, on the basis of nationalism. Muslims were a nation apart and therefore could not live in a united India under the control of another nation. That is how the two-nation theory was born. Without it, the Pakistan demand lost its philosophical meaning. With it, the Muslims could at least make out a case for themselves. It is against this background that the strengths and weaknesses of the two-nation theory should be viewed. Conclusion. The formulation of the idea of a Muslim nationality in India started with a relatively small nucleus. Then its influence slowly spread until it reached millions of people. The idea originated with a few individual leaders in various realms of mental and intellectual activity. A Sayyid Ahmad Khan here and Amir Ali there, a Shibli at one time and Iqbal at another. Gradually the different strands of Muslim life and culture in the subcontinent were synthesized. The image of a Muslim India took shape, an image which was simultaneously the cause and the effect of an increasingly coherent intellectual life. The ideas of a culturally united community and of a socially consistent society were accepted by the masses. They were also persuaded of the fact that they shared the same historical background. Thus were laid the foundations of a separate nationalism. This feeling of separate nationalism received an impetus from Hindu opposition to it. Nationalism thrives on opposition. The more it is crushed, the more vigorous its rebirth. It is stronger when it is holding an enemy at bay. This is precisely what happened in India. The higher the tempo of Hindu criticism, the greater the determination of the Muslims to achieve the goal. The Muslim enthusiasm for Pakistan was in direct proportion to Hindu condemnation of it. Nationalism is a twofold sentiment of sympathy towards all within the group and of hostility towards all without it. The solidarity of Muslim India marched with her distrust of all those who stood in her way. Coherence flourished in the face of opposition. In the final analysis, the idea of Muslim nationalism was more subjective than territorial, more psychological than political, while Indian or Hindu nationalism was more territorial than cultural, more historical than religious. This difference of approach was fundamental, and it is interesting to see that the Muslim theory followed the ideas of the English and French thinkers, who emphasized personal feeling at the first test of nationalism, while the Hindu conception had an affinity with the opinions of German writers, who judged a nationality by its objective marks. The Muslims felt that they were a nation, and by so doing, they underlined the subjective factor. The Hindus claimed that India was a nation, and in this, they emphasized the objective factor.